In 1974, farmers digging a well near the Chinese city of Xi'an struck something hard beneath the earth. It was not stone. It was a human face made of clay. Then they found another, and another. Soon, archaeologists uncovered thousands of life-size soldiers standing in silent formation beneath the ground. Infantrymen, archers, horses, chariots, officers with different faces, different hairstyles, and different ranks. An entire army had been buried for more than 2,000 years, waiting beside the tomb of a ruler who had feared death more than any enemy. That ruler was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He had united warring kingdoms, standardized writing, built roads across a vast realm, and ordered enormous defensive walls that would later become part of the Great Wall. He believed he had created a system that would last for 10,000 generations. But his dynasty collapsed only a few years after his death. The emperor failed to defeat mortality, yet the country he created survived him. That contradiction is the key to Chinese history. Again and again, powerful dynasties rose, expanded, grew wealthy, became divided, and fell into rebellion. Millions suffered. Capitals burned. Foreign armies crossed the frontiers. Emperors lost the mandate of heaven. And yet China returned. Sometimes under native rulers, sometimes under conquerors from beyond the Great Wall, sometimes as an empire, and eventually, as a revolutionary republic ruled by a communist party. The names changed, the borders moved, the language evolved, but the idea of a unified Chinese civilization proved almost impossible to destroy. To understand how that happened, we must go back before emperors, before dynasties, and before the land was called China. The story begins with rivers. In the north, the Yellow River carried rich soil across a wide plain. It made agriculture possible, but it could also change its course without warning. Floods swallowed villages and erased entire landscapes. Later generations called it China's sorrow. Farther south, the Yangtze flowed through warmer and wetter lands where rice farming developed. Between these rivers stood mountains, forests, deserts, and grasslands. China was never one simple place. It was a vast world of different climates and peoples. Thousands of years ago, farming villages appeared along both river systems. Communities grew larger. Wealth became unequal. Leaders gained power. Rituals became more elaborate. Chinese tradition later described a legendary age of wise rulers. The greatest of them was Yu, who supposedly saved the people from a catastrophic flood by channeling the water toward the sea. Yu was said to have founded the Xia dynasty. The Xia may have been connected to an early Bronze Age state known to archaeologists as Erlitu. Palaces, roads, workshops, and elite tombs prove that complex political power existed there. But the first Chinese dynasty confirmed by written records was the Shang. By the 2nd millennium BCE, Shang kings ruled important cities in the Yellow River region. They commanded armies, controlled bronze production, and performed rituals for royal ancestors. Their world was magnificent, disciplined, and violent. The Shang left their questions written on turtle shells and animal bones. Would it rain? Would the harvest succeed? Would an enemy attack? Was an illness caused by an angry ancestor? Diviners heated the bones until they cracked, then carved the king's questions into the surface. These oracle bone inscriptions are the earliest major body of Chinese writing ever discovered. The symbols changed over time, but they belong to the same written tradition that continues today. A modern Chinese reader lives in a civilization whose written roots reach back more than 3,000 years. But the Shang did not rule forever. Around 1046 BCE, a Western people called the Zhou defeated the last Shang king. The Zhou faced a dangerous problem. If the Shang ruler had possessed sacred authority, how could rebellion against him be justified? Their answer would shape Chinese politics for centuries. The Zhou declared that heaven had withdrawn its support from the Shang because the dynasty had become corrupt and cruel. The right to rule had passed to a more worthy family. This was the mandate of heaven. It gave emperors enormous authority, but it also placed a warning above every throne. A ruler governed only as long as he protected order and served the people. Floods, famine, rebellion, and defeat could be seen as signs that heaven had abandoned him. Victory meant a new dynasty had been chosen. Failure meant the old one deserved to fall. The Zhou ruled through regional lords who gradually became more powerful than the royal court. China fragmented into rival states. Alliances changed. Armies grew. Diplomacy became ruthless. This long crisis produced some of China's greatest thinkers. Confucius lived in an age when rulers betrayed one another and social order appeared to be collapsing. He believed the answer was not harsher punishment, but moral discipline. A ruler should lead through virtue. Children should respect parents. Officials should study, act responsibly, and place duty above selfish ambition. Confucius did not become powerful during his lifetime. He wandered from court to court, often disappointed. But his ideas would outlive nearly every king who rejected him. Other thinkers offered different paths. Taoist tradition emphasized harmony with the natural order and warned that aggressive government could make society worse. Mozi argued for practical government and concern for all people. Legalist thinkers believed morality was too weak to control human behavior. They demanded strict laws, clear rewards, severe punishments, and absolute obedience to the state. These ideas were not debated in peaceful universities. They were tested in war. By the 5th century BCE, 7 major states dominated China. This was the Warring States period. Rulers built larger armies, armed infantry with iron weapons, used cavalry, constructed fortifications, and counted their populations for taxation and military service. War was becoming a machine, and one Western kingdom learned to operate that machine better than anyone else. The state of Qin was once considered rough and backward by its rivals, but it adopted legalist reforms that rewarded military success, weakened hereditary nobles, organized households, and made agriculture serve the army. Qin did not need to be loved. It needed to win. One by one, the rival kingdoms were destroyed. In 221 BCE, the king of Qin declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. For the first time, the competing states were united beneath one central government. The emperor abolished many old feudal powers. He divided the realm into administrative districts controlled by officials. He standardized weights, measures, coinage, and the written script. Roads connected the capital to distant regions. Defensive walls were joined and extended across the northern frontier. These policies helped create the political shape of imperial China. But the cost was immense. Laborers were forced to build roads, palaces, walls, canals, and the emperor's enormous tomb. Taxes were heavy. Punishments were brutal. Books were destroyed in an attempt to control thought, although later accounts may have exaggerated the scale. Scholars accused of resisting the regime were persecuted. Qin Shi Huang searched desperately for immortality. He sent expeditions to find magical islands. He consumed substances believed to prolong life, some of which may have contained poisonous mercury. The man who called himself the ruler of 10,000 generations died while traveling through his empire in 210 BCE. His officials feared that news of his death would trigger chaos. According to tradition, they concealed the corpse inside the imperial carriage and placed carts of fish nearby to hide the smell. But they could not hide the weakness of the dynasty. Rebellion exploded. Generals changed sides. The Qin state, which had conquered every rival, collapsed in less than 15 years. Its cruelty destroyed it. Its institutions survived. From the civil war emerged Liu Bang, a former minor official of humble background. In 202 BCE, he founded the Han Dynasty. The contrast was extraordinary. China's first emperor had been born into royal power and tried to rule through fear. Liu Bang had begun as an ordinary man and learned that an empire could not survive on punishment alone. The Han kept many Qin institutions but softened the system. Confucian ideas gradually became central to government. Officials were expected to study history, ritual, and moral philosophy. Over time, education became a road to political power. Under Emperor Wu, Han armies expanded deep into Central Asia. Chinese forces fought the Xiongnu, a powerful confederation of steppe peoples. Envoys traveled west. Horses, glass, precious metals, textiles, religions, and ideas moved across a network of routes later called the Silk Road. China did not simply export silk. It entered a wider Eurasian world. The Han period brought advances in astronomy, engineering, medicine, historical writing, and papermaking. Sima Qian created a vast history of China after suffering one of the most humiliating punishments imaginable. Rather than take his own life, he endured disgrace so he could finish his work. His decision preserved the stories of rulers, rebels, assassins, generals, and ordinary people, who might otherwise have vanished. But prosperity could not remove the old pattern. Powerful landowners gained wealth. Peasants fell into debt. Court factions fought for control. Eunuchs, officials, imperial relatives, and generals competed behind palace walls. In 9 CE, a reformer named Wang Mang seized the throne and announced a new dynasty. He attempted major changes to land ownership and the economy. But confusion, resistance, and natural disasters undermined him. Rebellions spread, and the Han Dynasty was restored. It survived for nearly 2 more centuries. Then the center failed again. In 184, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted across the empire. Its followers believed a sick age was ending and a new world was beginning. The government defeated the rebellion, but regional warlords now commanded private armies. The emperor remained on the throne. Real power belonged to men with soldiers. In 220, the Han Dynasty ended. China broke into rival kingdoms remembered as the Three Kingdoms. This age became one of the most famous periods in Chinese culture. Later novels turned strategists such as Zhuge Liang and warlords such as Cao Cao into legendary figures. Their battles became stories about loyalty, ambition, intelligence, and betrayal. But behind the romance was devastation. Armies marched through farmland. Populations fled. Dynasties rose and vanished. The Qin briefly reunited the realm, only to collapse under internal conflict and invasions from the north. For centuries, China was divided. Northern regions were ruled by competing states, many founded by peoples whose ancestors had lived beyond the old imperial frontiers. In the south, Chinese courts preserved imperial traditions while adapting to new landscapes and populations. This period is often described as chaos, but it was also an age of transformation. Buddhism spread along trade routes from India and Central Asia. Monasteries appeared. Translators struggled to express foreign ideas in Chinese words. Cave temples at places such as Dunhuang and Longmen filled with paintings and statues. Conquerors adopted Chinese institutions. Chinese elites adopted new foods, clothing, music, and military practices. The civilization was not frozen. It was absorbing the people who had entered it. In 589, the Sui dynasty reunited China after centuries of division. The Sui rulers rebuilt central authority and connected north and south through the Grand Canal. This enormous waterway allowed grain from the fertile south to supply northern capitals and armies. It became one of the most important economic arteries in Chinese history. But the Sui repeated the mistake of the Qin. They demanded too much, too quickly. Massive construction projects, heavy taxation, and disastrous wars against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo exhausted the population. Rebellion spread. The dynasty collapsed after fewer than 40 years. Once again, a short and brutal dynasty created the foundation for a greater one. In 618, the Tang Dynasty rose. Tang China became one of the most powerful and cosmopolitan empires of the medieval world. Its capital, Chang'an, was a vast planned city filled with merchants, monks, diplomats, musicians, soldiers, and travelers from across Asia. Persians traded in its markets. Buddhist pilgrims passed through its gates. Foreign religions built places of worship. Chinese influence extended into Central Asia, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, though each region adapted what it received in its own way. Poetry flourished. Li Bai wrote with wild imagination and longing. Du Fu recorded war, hunger, separation, and the suffering of ordinary people. Their lines survive because they captured both the beauty of the Tang world and the pain beneath it. The dynasty also produced the only woman in Chinese history to rule openly as emperor. Wu Zetian began as a palace concubine. Through intelligence, alliances, ruthless political struggle, and administrative skill, she rose to supreme power. Her enemies portrayed her as monstrous, while modern historians have examined both her brutality and her ability to govern. Her reign revealed a truth the political order tried to deny. A woman could occupy the throne. But the Tang Golden Age was more fragile than it appeared. In 755, the general in Lushan rebelled. His armies captured major cities, and the emperor fled the capital. The rebellion lasted years and caused enormous destruction. The Tang eventually survived, but it never fully recovered. Regional military governors became powerful. The court weakened. Tax systems broke down. Rebellions returned. In 907, the Tang Dynasty fell. China divided once more. Yet the next great dynasty would not be remembered mainly for conquest. It would be remembered for invention. The Shang Dynasty, founded in 960, ruled one of the most advanced economies on earth. Cities expanded. Markets flourished. Paper money circulated. Printing made books cheaper and more available. A growing class of educated officials competed in civil service examinations. Gunpowder weapons developed. The magnetic compass improved navigation. Shipbuilding and trade connected Chinese ports to Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and East Africa. Farmers used new rice varieties that produced faster harvests. Population grew. Coal-fueled industries. Iron production reached extraordinary levels. Problem that wealth could not solve. Its northern enemies were militarily powerful. The Song court paid neighboring states to maintain peace, a policy that critics saw as humiliating but which was often cheaper than constant war. Even so, the dynasty lost northern China to the Jurchen Jin in the 12th century. The court fled south and rebuilt around the city of Hangzhou. The southern Song remained prosperous. Then the Mongols arrived. Under Genghis Khan and his descendants, Mongol armies created the largest connected land empire in history. They conquered northern China, destroyed the Jin state, and then spent decades attacking the southern Song. The resistance was fierce. Cities held out. Navies fought on rivers and along the coast. But the Mongols had learned siege warfare, engineering, and administration from the peoples they conquered. In 1279, the last Song forces were defeated at sea. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruled China as emperor of the Yuan dynasty. For the first time, all of China was governed by a dynasty founded by steppe conquerors. The Mongols placed themselves above many of their subjects in a formal social hierarchy. Chinese officials served the state, but resentment remained. At the same time, the Yuan connected China to a vast network stretching across Eurasia. Merchants, envoys, engineers, doctors, artists, and religious figures traveled enormous distances. Foreign visitors described the wealth of Chinese cities and the sophistication of imperial administration. But Mongol unity did not last. The Yuan faced court conflict, financial disorder, floods, disease, and rebellion. Secret societies and rebel armies spread across the countryside. One of their leaders was Zhu Yuanzhang, a man born into desperate poverty. His family died during famine and disease. He entered a Buddhist monastery, became a rebel soldier, defeated his rivals, and in 1368 founded the Ming Dynasty. Few lives in history represent a greater rise. From starving orphan to emperor of China. As the Hongwu emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang rebuilt agriculture, restored Chinese rule, and created powerful institutions. But he also became deeply suspicious. Purges killed officials and their families. The founder who had escaped chaos began to see betrayal everywhere. His son, the Yongle Emperor, moved the capital to Beijing and built the Forbidden City. He also sponsored the voyages of Zheng He, a Muslim-born eunuch admiral who commanded enormous fleets across the Indian Ocean. Zheng He's ships reached Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. They carried gifts, soldiers, diplomats, and Chinese prestige. For a brief moment, Ming power sailed across the ocean on a scale the world had never seen. Then the voyages stopped. The reasons included cost, court politics, military threats from the north, and changing priorities. China did not completely turn away from maritime trade, but the state abandoned these spectacular expeditions. The Ming strengthened the Great Wall, expanded commercial agriculture, and became deeply connected to the global silver economy. Silver from Japan and the Americas flowed into China in exchange for silk, porcelain, and tea. But dependence on silver created danger. When silver supplies became unstable, taxes became harder to pay. Climate shocks damaged harvests. A period of global cooling contributed to famine and unrest. Corruption weakened administration. Soldiers went unpaid. By the early 17th century, the dynasty was trapped between internal rebellion and danger beyond the Great Wall. In 1644, rebel leader Li Ziqing entered Beijing. The last Ming emperor climbed Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City and took his own life. The rebels believed they had won. But a Ming general at the Great Wall made a decision that changed history. He opened the gates to the Manchus. The Manchus came from the northeast. They defeated Li Zicheng, entered Beijing, and founded the Qing Dynasty. They were outsiders, but they did not simply destroy the Chinese system. They adopted it, used it, and expanded it. Under emperors such as Kangxi and Qianlong, the Qing controlled a vast multi-ethnic empire that included China proper, Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. The population grew dramatically. Agriculture expanded. Art, scholarship, and literature flourished. To many observers in the 18th century, Qing China looked powerful, wealthy, and secure. But the balance of world power was changing. European states had developed new military, financial, and naval systems. Britain wanted more Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain, but Chinese merchants wanted little that Britain produced. Silver flowed east. Britain found a brutal solution. Opium grown in British-controlled India was smuggled into China in enormous quantities. Addiction spread. Silver flowed out. Qing officials tried to suppress the trade. Britain answered with war. The First Opium War began in 1839. British steamships and modern artillery overwhelmed Qing defenses. China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing, surrender Hong Kong, open treaty ports, and grant Britain major commercial advantages. More unequal treaties followed. Foreign powers gained privileges inside China. Missionaries entered new regions. Ports fell under outside influence. The Qing state appeared unable to defend the country. Humiliation from abroad was followed by catastrophe within. In the 1850s, Hong Xiuquan, a failed examination candidate who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus, led the Taiping Rebellion. His movement captured Nanjing and created a rival state that promised radical social transformation. The resulting civil war became one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Cities were destroyed. Farmland was abandoned. Tens of millions may have died from battle, famine, and disease. The Qing survived only with the help of regional armies and local commanders. But that survival weakened the dynasty further. Officials launched the self-strengthening movement, attempting to build modern arsenals, shipyards, schools, and industries while preserving the traditional political order. The results were uneven. Then came a defeat that shocked the nation. In 1894, China went to war with Japan, a country that Chinese elites had long viewed as culturally junior. Japan had modernized rapidly after the Meiji Restoration. Its forces defeated the Qing on land and sea. China lost influence over Korea and ceded Taiwan. The message was devastating. The old order was not merely weakening. It had fallen behind. Reformers demanded change. Conservatives resisted. In 1900, the anti-foreign Boxer movement attacked missionaries and Chinese Christians. The Qing court supported the movement, and an international force invaded, occupied Beijing, and imposed another massive settlement. By the beginning of the 20th century, the dynasty had almost no credibility left. In 1911, revolution spread from city to city. Provinces declared independence from the Qing. In 1912, the last emperor, Huai, abdicated while still a child. More than 2,000 years of imperial rule had ended. But the republic that replaced it was not united. Revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen dreamed of nationalism, democracy, and economic welfare. Yet military strongman Yuan Shikai took power and tried to make himself emperor. After his death, China fragmented among warlords. Foreign powers controlled concessions and influenced trade. Students and intellectuals demanded science, democracy, and national renewal. The May 4th movement of 1919 attacked both foreign domination and old traditions. New political movements emerged. The Chinese Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, sought to reunify the country. The Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921, promised revolution in the name of workers and peasants. At first, they cooperated. Then they turned on each other. In 1927, nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek attacked communists and labor activists. Civil war followed. Communist bases were surrounded and destroyed. In 1934, the Red Army escaped on the Long March, a desperate retreat across mountains, rivers, and hostile territory. Most of those who began did not complete it. But the march elevated Mao Zedong to leadership. The communists survived. Then a greater enemy invaded. Japan had already seized Manchuria in 1931. In 1937, full-scale war erupted. Japanese armies captured major cities, including Nanjing, where mass killing and sexual violence took place on a horrific scale. The nationalist government retreated inland. Cities were bombed. Civilians fled. Hunger and disease spread. Nationalists and communists formed an uneasy alliance, but they continued preparing for the war that would come after Japan was defeated. When World War II ended in 1945, China had suffered enormously, and almost immediately, the Civil War resumed. The nationalists possessed larger conventional forces and international recognition, but their government was damaged by corruption, inflation, and war exhaustion. The communists had built support in many rural areas and proved more effective at organization and mobilization. By 1949, communist armies controlled the mainland. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government retreated to Taiwan. On October 1st, Mao Zedong stood at Tiananmen Gate in Beijing and proclaimed the People's Republic of China. After decades of invasion, civil war, and fragmentation, the mainland was unified again. But the price of the new order would be severe. The Communist Party carried out land reform, destroying the old landlord class through confiscation, public struggle sessions, imprisonment, and executions. Industry was nationalized. Political opposition was eliminated. China entered the Korean War against United Nations forces led by the United States. The conflict reinforced the new state's revolutionary identity and deepened its isolation from the West. Mao believed China could transform itself through mass mobilization. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward. Rural communities were organized into enormous communes. Farmers were pushed into unrealistic production campaigns. Backyard furnaces were built to create steel. Local officials, afraid to report failure, exaggerated harvests. The state collected grain based on false numbers. The result was catastrophe. Food disappeared from villages. People starved while official reports claimed success. From 1959 to 1961, famine killed tens of millions, though exact estimates remain debated. The Great Leap damaged Mao's position, but he was not finished. In 1966, he launched the Cultural Revolution, warning that enemies were corrupting the revolution from within. Students formed Red Guard groups. Teachers, officials, intellectuals, religious figures, and ordinary citizens were publicly humiliated, beaten, imprisoned, or killed. Temples, books, artworks, and family records were destroyed. Children denounced parents. Political factions fought in the streets. The movement eventually consumed many of its own supporters. The army restored order in many areas, and millions of young people were sent to the countryside. The Cultural Revolution did not create permanent revolution. It created exhaustion. During the same period, China's relationship with the Soviet Union collapsed. Mao began a dramatic opening toward the United States. In 1972, President Richard Nixon visited China, changing the global balance of the Cold War. Mao died in 1976. The country he left behind was unified and internationally powerful, but also poor, traumatized, and economically isolated. The next transformation came from Deng Xiaoping. Deng did not completely reject Mao or Communist Party rule. Instead, he argued that China needed practical results. Rural families were allowed to farm under new incentives. Special economic zones attracted foreign investment. Private business gradually expanded. Coastal factories produced goods for global markets. The change was extraordinary. Villages became industrial cities. Hundreds of millions moved from rural regions to urban areas. China became the center of global manufacturing. Since the beginning of reform and opening in 1978, rapid growth lifted hundreds of millions from extreme poverty and transformed China into the world's second-largest economy. But economic opening did not bring political pluralism. In 1989, students and citizens gathered in Tiananmen Square and other cities demanding political reform, accountability, and an end to corruption. After weeks of protest, the government declared martial law. On the night of June 3rd and the morning of June 4th, troops entered central Beijing. Soldiers fired on civilians, and an unknown number of people were killed. The event remains heavily censored inside mainland China. After 1989, the party made an unspoken bargain with society. Political control would remain strict. Economic opportunity would expand. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. Factories multiplied. Exports surged. New highways, ports, airports, and high-speed rail lines changed the landscape. Cities such as Shenzhen, once a small border town, became symbols of a new China. The 2008 Beijing Olympics announced that the country had returned to the center of world attention. Then China entered another era. Under Xi Jinping, who became the Communist Party's top leader in 2012, power became more centralized. A vast anti-corruption campaign punished officials at every level, while also removing political rivals and strengthening control from the center. The state invested in advanced technology, military modernization, infrastructure, and the Belt and Road Initiative. China expanded its global economic and diplomatic influence. At the same time, censorship and surveillance grew more sophisticated. The government tightened control over civil society, media, education, and digital life. Policies in Xinjiang, restrictions in Hong Kong, and pressure surrounding Taiwan became major sources of international tension. China's rise created admiration, dependence, fear, and resistance. It became a manufacturing giant, a technological competitor, a nuclear power, and a central force in global trade. But once again, success created new dangers. The population began to age. Birth rates fell. Property debt threatened growth. Environmental damage became harder to ignore. Tensions with the United States intensified. The same centralized system that could build infrastructure at remarkable speed could also suppress warnings, silence criticism, and make mistakes difficult to correct. Modern China is not an ancient dynasty. Its leaders do not officially claim the mandate of heaven. But the old question remains. What gives a government the right to rule? For the Shang, it was the approval of ancestors. For the Zhou, it was heaven. For the emperors, it was order. For the revolutionaries, it was national survival and social transformation. For the modern Communist Party, legitimacy has rested on unity, economic development, national strength, and the promise that China will never again suffer the weakness and humiliation of the 19th and early 20th centuries. That promise explains much of the country's ambition. It also explains much of its fear. China's rulers remember the Great Wall, but they also remember that walls failed. They remember the Forbidden City, but they also remember the child emperor forced to surrender it. They remember the Opium Wars, foreign occupation, civil war, famine, and invasion. And above all, they remember that nearly every dynasty believed it was permanent just before it began to fall. The history of China is not a straight line from ancient glory to modern power. It is a cycle of creation and destruction. The Qin united the realm and collapsed. The Han built an imperial identity and broke apart. The Tang opened China to the world and nearly died in rebellion. The Song created extraordinary wealth but fell to conquest. The Mongols ruled the largest land empire in history and lost China within a century. The Ming restored native rule, then opened the gates to the Manchus. The Qing expanded farther than most earlier dynasties, then collapsed before the forces of modern nationalism and empire. The Republic destroyed the throne but could not end the wars. The Communist Revolution restored unity but unleashed disasters of its own. And the reforms that made China rich created challenges no emperor ever faced. Yet through every collapse, something survived. The writing, the historical memory, the belief that the land could be reunited, the idea that government carried a moral responsibility to preserve order, and the conviction that China was not simply one kingdom among many, but the center of a civilization with a past too deep to disappear.